The U-2 is a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft that was developed for the CIA in the late 1950s. There was a myth that there was a bomber gap in between the American reserves and the Soviet reserves of their bomber fleets, and so we desperately wanted to know, did the Soviet Union in fact have this incredibly large bomber fleet? We needed to have an aircraft that could go and perform reconnaissance to determine whether or not this was true. What's, I think, so striking about the design of the U-2, which was designed by Kelly Johnson at Skunk Works, is that it's really a glider with a jet engine. It has an 80-foot wingspan. It's incredibly light, which is how it was able to reach such high altitudes, up to 75,000 feet. In the late 1950s, the U-2 was equipped with the most sophisticated camera equipment of the day, and it was housed in the belly of the aircraft, and images were captured on film, and it was incredibly high resolution for the time. Those camera systems continue to be developed over the years. Up until today, we have incredibly high resolution digital photographs. So the pilots for the U-2 were recruited from the Air Force to work for the CIA, and then they had to go under extensive psychological and physical tests in order to determine whether or not they were capable of going to such high altitudes. If you go to more than 60,000 feet, your blood will start to boil and fuel in your aircraft will start to boil. So there needed to be changes made to mitigate those sort of things occurring. So the pilots who flew the U-2 were wearing basically what we would think of as spacesuits, high pressure suits. Many of the missions in the late 50s were just around Soviet borders because there was concern about sparking any sort of Soviet hostilities, because even though some people say that the U-2 is a stealthy aircraft, it is stealthy in as much as it has a very thin, long fuselage and it flies very high, but it is definitely able to be tracked by radar. So when the U-2 was crossing the Soviet Union, they could see it. They knew that it was there and they were angry about it, but they just couldn't do anything about it because interceptors couldn't get up to that altitude and their missiles couldn't hit it. So there still needed to be some caution exercised with sending these missions. The Soviet Union knew that they were being spied upon by the U-2. Gary Powers was an Air Force fighter pilot from Kentucky. He was recruited by the CIA to work under the auspices of Lockheed to fly U-2s, and he couldn't resist the opportunity to do so, not because he wanted to be a spy, but because the CIA was offering him $2,500 a month to do so, which was a lot of money in the late 1950s. He was stationed in Turkey and he had flown about 27 missions, had more than 500 hours of flight time, and was probably the most qualified U-2 pilot at the time that the Eisenhower administration gave a go-to for Operation Grand Slam, which was going to be the longest traversal of the Soviet Union up until that point. So, Gary Powers sets out on his flight. About 4 hours in, a surface-to-air missile explodes near his plane, and he starts to go down. At about 25,000 feet, he was able to detach from the aircraft, but he was being held in there by his oxygen mask. And he was supposed to hit a self-destruct button that was inside all of the U-2s that wouldn't destruct the aircraft, but that would destruct the camera system so that it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. But he wasn't able to hit that switch and was thrown from the plane. And then at about 15,000 feet, his parachute automatically deployed and he came down in the Soviet farmland where people were waiting to welcome him and take him into custody. For a brief time, the American government tried to go with a cover story that the U-2 was actually performing a meteorological study, but soon after had to admit that yes, this was a spy plane, and no, we aren't ashamed to admit it because we offered to have an open skies program and Khrushchev was not having it, and so we need to know, did the Soviet Union have the fleet that they were claiming that they had so that we could prepare ourselves accordingly. Kind of stuck by that story. Gary Powers was put on trial in Moscow and sentenced to 3 years. Was let out after about 2 years in exchange for a Soviet spy. But it was the time historically that the larger public knew that we had espionage programs and that they involved these high-flying U-2s. Our U-2 is the 7th U-2 that was ever built. It was a U-2A, and it was operated by the CIA for a number of missions going around the border of the Soviet Union. It was taken over by the Air Force on loan in the 1970s and then used for tactical recon over Vietnam. It was designated a U-2C because its engine was upgraded, and the inlets on this version are going to be different as a result of that upgrade. And it was originally without any kind of paint, because paint is heavy, and for every coat of paint you put on an aircraft, you're going to lower its altitude abilities. The whole point of the U-2 was that it was going to be out of reach of interceptor aircraft and surface-to-air missiles, so why paint it? Because it's going to be so far up there, and you don't want to, there's no point in camouflaging it if no one can reach it. So it was unpainted for many years, and it just received its camo coloring when it was used at British bases in the Middle East in the late 1970s. And that was right before it was transferred here to the museum in 1982. What makes U-2 such an exceptional aircraft is its longevity and the versatility of its uses. It was built for strategic recon and then was used for tactical recon throughout the years, and it's just shown itself to be a very enduring aircraft.
There's nowhere else in the Air Force where you can go out by yourself and be that alone, unafraid. I think it's just a great airplane. The fact that they could design something that essentially in the 50s that is still around flying, they've modified it heavily since then, but essentially designed from the 1950s. So solidly built, and just a great airplane that stood the test of time, and it's just really fun to fly. Fifth RS is one of the most fantastic units I've ever been around. Just all the people, I haven't come across anyone who is below average. Everyone out here is great. Leadership's great. The base supports us. I love just being around all these people and how everyone is really committed to the mission. I think that's a really cool thing here, is that every day we're out doing operational missions, and the commitment that you see for that's really great.
It's so great being a part of something that's withheld all this time. I'm a firm believer that the U-2 is going nowhere. The squadron's going to be around for a good minute. As small as it is, everyone's a real tight-knit family, and it's good to come to work every day with my brothers and sisters. It's an old airframe, so as with any other thing that you have that's old, there's going to be a lot of upkeep, a lot of things that wear out. So along with that, you know, it's constantly keeping us on our toes. Everyone has their own unique mission, especially with this airframe. You have a lot of different systems that are on it. So you have a lot of civilian counterparts that are out there working it, along with the different avionics crews, your electrics and environmental, as well as your crew chiefs who are going through. They'll be on the comm set relaying between the pilot on the ground what is and needs to be happening, and everyone else out there is kind of supporting them get those things accomplished, as well as launching out the jet itself.
Aside from just being alone by yourself for long periods of time, there's physiological challenges associated with that. And then also, you know, having things like this suit. We get a whole whole teams of people that help us out. The little car is known as a mobile. It's the chase car that comes in at very high speeds, taking that turn onto the runway very rapidly as we come in to do our landings. They're sort of our eyes and ears on the outside of the jet. When you're in this suit and you have the helmet on, your peripheral vision's sort of occluded. You get little temporal distortions. It can be a little bit weird. So the mobile driver, while he's driving onto the runway, getting right behind you, assists you just in reassuring you by telling you your altitude above the runway. It's also a qualified pilot in that car, so they're going to kind of know what actions you should be taking if something looks out of place, and they can help guide you back to landing the jet safely.
ERT is an en route recovery team, and our sole purpose is to support the missions downrange. We exist to swap out aircraft so that they get fresh jets in theater where they need them to support the mission, and bring back home those that need phase maintenance.
Our ERTs consist of 14 to 17 airmen, depending on how many aircraft we're actually going to phase. And that team deploys out together as a maintenance team. We take every specialty that's needed to fix, launch, recover, and fix any maintenance issues that are on those aircraft before either sending them forward to a forward operating location or back here to Beale.
Essentially, it's just the 14 team members, and it's their everyday job that they do here at Beale. So it's typically launch, recovery, servicing, maintenance, anything that would cause the airplane not to break.
First phase is the preparation phase, and that is a month ahead of time. We are preparing the charts. We are coordinating with the building and people downrange and getting the equipment that we need once we're there.
We develop our team here. We spend a few weeks getting our maintenance team together. Usually a combination of individuals that have been on the trip before and bring that corporate knowledge and expertise with them, as well as maybe some younger but also qualified airmen that get to experience it. The second phase is actually sending our team over to Fairford.
Phase number 2 is basically the deployment. So you're transitioning from home station to the forward operating location, which would be Fairford. And there we would set everything up to receive the aircraft either from the forward operating location or from Beale.
Once the planes arrive there, one of the planes will come out of theater to England as well. We get those planes, turn them, and then we'll send another plane back into theater.
The 9th Physiological Support Squadron provides support to the ERT by providing maintenance and repairs and inspections on the pilot's life support equipment, to include the full pressure suit. So usually a 3-person crew to come out to England, and then we are responsible for helping the pilot dress and integrate into the aircraft, making sure that all of his equipment is functional, and then doing any minor repairs or inspections that that equipment may require.
We save a lot of money for the Air Force by sending a maintenance team to Fairford. In the past, we hired a Lockheed Martin contract to do phases in the 380th, and now we no longer pay that bill, which was a very high bill, and we save millions of dollars a year by bringing the jets back here for phase.
We're not breaking new ground. As often as we are doing this, it's a lot of the same contact people, and we've got a good working relationship with our overseas partners.
If I was going to say a bottom line about our ERTs, I'd say that our maintenance group here and our wing has found a very cost-effective way to perform this heavy maintenance, and to do it in such a way that we can save the Air Force a lot of money and utilize our airmen to let them do what they do best to keep our fleet healthy.